How well do you know your spirits? The world of liquor is hard in more ways than one. One of the trickiest questions that I get asked on here is what substitutions people should make when they don't have the specific brand that I use. And while I'll always try my best to recommend, I thought it might be helpful to do a video on the things that influence how a spirit tastes. And that way you can maybe look into what you do have available to you and hopefully be able to make a bit more of an informed choice about what's going to be the best fit. First things first, what is a spirit? So spirits have to be distilled, which is a process which separates the alcohol from water and other substances, and then it condenses it again. So they sit at a higher ABV, or alcohol by volume, than things like beer and wine, which are just fermented. They also have little to no sugar added, and beyond this really basic definition, the term spirit is a very broad church covering everything from vodka to brandy to mezcal to baijiu. There are a few factors though, which will always have an impact on the flavour of the finished product. So, number one, what is it made from? So the primary ingredient, so the fruit or grain or other plant which is first fermented and then distilled, will have obviously a major impact on the final flavour profile because some of its characteristics are retained through that whole process. And it's actually also how spirits are often categorised. So for instance, single malt has to be made from malted barley, bourbon has to be at least 51% corn, and so on. Number two, you have how has it been distilled? So actually the type and the size and the shape of the stills, which is the apparatus doing the distilling, that affects which flavour compounds survive the distillation. And so it really affects the texture of the spirit as well. Other parts of the production process matter too. So for example, whether barley malt is dried over peat or not, and single malts is going to be whether or not it's a peated whiskey. Number three, has it been aged? So whether or not a spirit is aged, and then for how long and in what. So for example, if it's just in stainless steel, which is pretty inactive, or wooden barrels, and then whether those barrels have previously held anything else, that's going to have a major influence on the spirit and the same spirit can taste and feel entirely different at various stages of the aging process. Number four, has anything been added? Probably kind of an obvious one, but a lot of key categories like gin, spiced rum, amari have botanicals and other flavorings added to it. So those obviously have a major influence, as well as just sort of your base spirit or wine. You're gonna have some other flavors coming through there. They can actually be a lot more identifiable because, for instance, there is actually some vanilla in this or whatever. So it's a little bit easier to pick up than sometimes those a bit more esoteric ones that you get just from the flavor compounds created in the distillation process. So, for example, if we look at rums, a rum can be made from either sugarcane juice or molasses, so both kind of byproducts of the sugar industry. Molasses is actually a byproduct. Sugarcane juice you can kind of juice fresh. So for that you might get something like a rum agricole, or then the rest of these are made from molasses. About 90% of rums are. Then you have to take the style of still into consideration. So you've got a copper pot still, or most of them are copper. So that's kind of the OG still. It's just like a little kettle. Or you have a column still, and that's essentially like lots of pot stills stacked on top of each other, and you can run that continuously. So it makes a lot more, it makes just a bigger volume of spirit, but it also makes kind of a cleaner spirit. It strips more, I guess, impurities out of the alcohol, but that's also where you get some flavor from as well. So those obviously have a massive impact on what the finished product actually tastes like. So for example, you can have something which is majority column still, and that's going to be really quite clean and kind of quite a light spirit. Or you can have something which is majority pot still, and that's going to be kind of a lot bigger and funkier. Most producers will actually do a blend of both so that you get, a little bit of best of both worlds, which is obviously generally the smart thing to do when you're still looking for some of those more flavorful compounds that come out of your pot still distillation. So generally your pot still, works well in things like tiki drinks where you really want them to pack a punch. Then we have aging, so older spirits tend to have a bit more spice and dryness and lose some of the fruity freshness of younger spirits. Just bear in mind that color isn't everything, because rum can have coloring added to it. So something that just says gold on the bottle probably isn't actually really that old. Whereas you actually get some rums which are aged and then filtered, so they still fit that sort of white rum look. You have something like this guy, which was aged in PX casks, so Pedro Jimenez sherry, so it's taken on that real raisiny richness from what was in the cask beforehand. And then last but not least, of course, our good old spiced rum. So there, the flavorings that are kind of added in there usually take over the flavor of the rum itself. And as I said, can actually be quite easy to sort of pull out. They're quite good for training your palate, a little bit easier to pinpoint. Hello, back behind my laptop here for another little chat about our partners over at Skillshare. They're an online learning platform who have a real focus on personal development and creativity. And while I really want to take advantage of their amazing raft of online courses on various creative pursuits like painting and creative writing and things like that, I did decide last time that I needed to start with my time management to make sure I had the time to do that. So I did a course by Ben Rowland called Productivity Week Planner. I did really like it because being quite time poor, it was only 19 minutes. You can see how long each course is, which is really useful to know how long you need to dedicate to it. I was wondering if any of you guys have actually had a chance to do it, maybe one of the cocktail classes. Please let me know in the comments below if you have. And if you haven't joined up yet, then click the link below. The first 1,000 people who use it get 1 month free, which is pretty awesome to get started on your journey of creativity and productivity in 2022. So let's have a little taste through these and see if I've just been talking rubbish or if it actually all holds up. So this one is your rum agricole. Rum agricole does actually have to be made. It's called an appellation contrôlée, so it does actually have to be made in Martinique. You can get other examples of a similar style of rum being made elsewhere. Like we actually have a really delicious one made up in Queensland in Australia from Husk Distillery. So it does have quite, almost like quite a raw character to it. You get like a lot of, a little bit of kind of a white sugar note to it, definitely not caramelly or anything kind of darker. And a real grassy kind of edge and a little bit waxy. Light, bright, pretty savory, you know, still fairly neutral, like definitely enough going on, but it's not sort of coating your mouth or a massive flavor bomb. So I do like substituting that into things like mojitos, Surfsides, sort of anything using min or, you know, that's just generally meant to be that kind of little bit fresher. A daiquiri with that is really delicious as well. Then we'll move on to our Pampero. So this one is obviously the same color as the rum agricole. They're both, you know, absolutely kind of clear white, I guess not white, just clear. But this one is actually 2 years old. It's aged and then they just strip the color out of it. So again, is meant to be used in those sort of white rum cocktails. But it is made from molasses, so completely different, well, not completely different, it's still from sugar, but you know, not the same as the fresh sugar cane juice, which is used in your rum agricole. And you can smell it's definitely a bit sweeter, has a bit of a vanilla honey sort of vibe going on. Getting a bit of banana from that as well, which is quite a common kind of tasting note in rum because of a thing called esters, which we'll definitely go into at some other point. So despite being a bit fruitier and rounder, because it is that kind of molasses-based rum, because it's majority continuous distillation, it's still really quite light and sort of neutral. Sounds like a bad word, but actually it's kind of what you want in a lot of cocktails. If you just don't want the rum to be overpowering, you just want it working with everything else that's going in there, so that they're kind of greater than the sum of their parts. That's definitely a good option for that. Then we have this guy, I think Pussers, I always get nervous saying it. So this is a real kind of traditional Navy style rum. And so they're actually really proud of using wooden pot stills. And yeah, you can like smell that out the glass compared to the other two. It's real kind of like almost smells like you could chew it, you know? And pretty funky. Like you've got a little bit of a savory kind of grassiness and a little bit of fruit, but also like, you know, that really dark toffee that you get, and like just a little bit of stank, like in a way that's quite intriguing. So yeah, just actually even the texture of that is definitely a bit more viscous. You know, you can kind of see the legs in the glass there compared to the other two, with being that pot still kind of heavier spirit. And it's just like a pretty big whack of flavor there. So it works really well in tiki drinks. You know, when it's all like fruity and tropical, and so you almost want something that's just like a little bit funky in there that, you know, cuts through all of that wholesome fruitiness. So that's definitely what that style of rum is really good for. And again, has like a real kind of caramel sweetness to it. Then we'll go on to our little Dos Madeiras. So this one obviously made sense for us to have at Bomba, my bar, because we have a bit of a Spanish vibe going on. So finished in Pedro Jimenez sherry casks for 5 years. So it's a pretty rich color you can see there. So that one, you're getting way more dried fruit. So the others have all had quite a lot of kind of fresh fruit, tropical sort of vibe on the nose. And this one's definitely getting into your sort of raisins and dates, which is going to be coming majority from the PX cask, but also just from it being, I think, a little bit older than all of these. So yeah, lots of sort of treacly, kind of sweeter notes to it. But because it is that bit older, you actually find the oak quite often kind of dries things out a little bit as well. So it feels like it's almost going to be a little bit too sweet up front, and then you just get this really lovely kind of drying tannin structure coming through, which is really, really nice. I honestly haven't played around with it too much in cocktails yet, but lovely just for kind of sipping, either just like neat or on the rocks for sure. And then last but not least, good old Sailor Jerry. I think I'm probably the only bartender that doesn't actually have a Sailor Jerry tattoo. So yeah, with it being spiced, you're kind of looking for, I guess, the flavorings that they've deliberately put in there rather than just the ones that are created through the distilling process. So you get heaps of vanilla, heaps of orange straight out the glass. Bit of kind of cinnamon in there as well. And so it's a really interesting one because it's nowhere near as viscous in texture as these two. So it's probably majority column distilled. Obviously they make a lot of Sailor Jerry, so it would make sense that they're using those continuous stills or mostly using it. But then it does kind of have, obviously added in there, some of the flavors and characteristics that you would expect of an older rum. And obviously kind of looks that way as well. But I can't say for sure, but I wouldn't imagine that it's actually been sort of sitting in a barrel for 15 years or anything like that. That's all popped in there for your pleasure along with your Coca-Cola. So definitely got some really specific flavor notes in there, like definitely vanilla, definitely orange. So as I said, a good one to hone your palate when you're first trying to figure out how to pick those kind of flavors out of spirits. And then that can sort of help you know what to match them with and just generally substitute into cocktails. So obviously I've used rums to kind of illustrate my point here, but this actually applies across basically all spirits. So for instance, in whiskey, you have the same sort of thing where you can have blended whiskey, which is partially single malt or partially malted whiskey and partially column distilled whiskey. You know, you can have in tequila and mezcal, they both come from agave, so you get specific agave flavors. And then obviously whether it's a blanco, añejo, or reposado is gonna have a massive impact on the flavor of it in terms of how long it's been aged and so on. So I guess what I'm saying is, for instance, if I make a cocktail using the rum agricole, then the closest thing that you would want to get would be sort of your lighter and brighter column distilled rum if you had one to hand. But if you didn't have that, then actually it probably would make more sense to maybe go somewhere completely different, like a Blanco tequila, rather than jumping to like a PX aged rum, because that's actually less similar in terms of the flavor profile. I hope that makes sense. Obviously, if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. And I definitely, do want to have a few more conversations around this, because I definitely want to make sure that everyone always feels empowered to make a cocktail whenever they feel like it, even if they don't feel like they have the exact correct ingredients to hand. I hope this helps you figure it out a little bit. So now you know.